As Chad Daybell's defense attorney, John Pryor, continues to create doubt in the accused killer's triple murder case, I found his claim of the medical examiner having confirmation bias to be creative and worthy of discussion. Let's look inside. Hey, thanks for joining us here at Profiling Evil tonight as we continue to watch the unfolding events in the Chad Daybell triple murder case up in Boise, Idaho. At stake is Chad Daybell's life as he faces the death penalty for the murder of his wife, Tammy Daybell, and the children of his secret lover, Lori Vallow. Those kids, J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan. Now, Lori Daybell would become Chad Daybell's wife just weeks after his wife Tammy Daybell unexpectedly died and was buried. Hey, make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button and ringing the bell so you're getting all of our notifications. Now let's dig into this case just a little deeper about what happened today that really caught my attention. You see, in today's trial, defense attorney John Pryor questioned the defense expert that he brought in, and this was a board-certified pathologist named Dr. Kathy Raven. Dr. Raven isn't a newbie to this thing. She's testified more than 300 times and is considered to be an expert by the court. Now, during his examination, Pryor did very little, in my opinion, to move the needle on the Utah medical examiner's findings about Tammy Daybell and their opinion that Tammy died as of suffocation or asphyxiation. You know, it seems the doubt that Pryor wanted to create was to cast doubt on the state's position of homicide. And this thing had more to do with his theories rather than science. But it doesn't matter because all he's got to do is get a jury to believe the same kind of scenario that he's pitching. In the trial, Dr. Raven testified that in her opinion, there wasn't enough evidence to get the finding of homicide that the Utah State Medical Examiner came back with. A finding of homicide by asphyxiation. They say Tammy's death should have been ruled as undetermined. Now, defense attorney John Pryor entered the notion that the Utah Medical Examiner was swayed by something called confirmation bias. Now, I've got to admit, the concept intrigued me, so I did a little research on the idea and the theories behind it, and here's what I found. And in actuality, it's something that I think all of us wonder about from time to time in all of our daily interactions with people, in the way that we deal with problems, and now as we consider whether the medical examiner had this confirmation bias prior to making decisions on how Tammy Daybell died. Confirmation bias is this tendency to search for, to interpret, or remember information in a way that confirms somebody's preconceived notion or perception. In this case, the idea is that the Utah Medical Examiner likely had confirmation bias or a predisposed position when performing Tammy Daybell's autopsy, and that the bias significantly affected the medical examiner's objectivity. Now, this is really interesting because we've all been guilty of this in the past, where we've already had a decision made up in our mind of what the outcome was. In fact, I thought it'd be helpful to review the stages of the medical examination process, from the initial crime scene investigation, in this case through the exhumation of the body, and then the final autopsy report. And perhaps we'll be able to see the issue and examine this issue in a way that we can kind of determine for ourselves whether we believe Pryor's notion is going to hold any water in our minds or in the minds of the jury as they continue to have this case unfold in the courtroom. Medical examiners play a crucial role in the criminal justice system. Their role is to provide vital information about the cause and manner of death. Now, these stakes are incredibly high, and it is essential that a medical examiner's work be conducted with the utmost objectivity and accuracy. These folks have to be independent professionals who look at the evidence and make decisions based on what they're learning from the evidence. However, like all human beings, medical examiners can be susceptible to these preconceived notions. And I want you to think about your own preconceived notions that you might have from time to time. Now, my thoughts are coming after studying this phenomenon and applying the investigative principles that I've learned over the course of my career. So I'm going to share things from my perspective, and I'm going to be interested in what your perspective is as this thing continues to roll out. And I hope that you'll share your perspectives below, even as we go through this discussion today. Confirmation bias is this cognitive phenomenon where individuals favor some information that confirms a pre-existing belief and hypotheses while disregarding or undervaluing evidence that contradicts these kinds of things. In the context of medical examinations, this bias can lead to skewed interpretations of forensic evidence, potentially resulting in erroneous conclusions about the cause and manner of death. I mean, think about just the different camps in things like people who watch channels like CNN or people that watch channels like Fox News. Many already have a preconceived determination of how they want to view the news. That's why they go to these individual channels, to get information that supports the belief system that they already have. If a medical examiner is doing that, it could be problematic. So, during the initial investigative stages, medical examiners develop preliminary hypotheses based on information that's unfolding, information that comes from first responders, the coroner, or even the follow-up investigations. Now, this could include information about perceived causes of death. It includes testimony of witnesses, and it includes evidence that's recovered in and around the crime scene, including behavioral evidence. And we talk a lot about behavioral evidence on this thing. And it can be information that comes even later in time. Investigators return to the crime scene often, many times, and find additional kinds of evidence. Now, investigators are trained to avoid these preconceived notions and to work strictly from the facts. I mean, think back to the old Dragnet show and Joe Friday, just the facts. Or better yet, think of the quote that I often share by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who penned the Sherlock Holmes series. He said, "It is a capital mistake to theorize before one has all the facts, for insensibly they spend all of their time twisting the theories to fit the facts, rather than allowing the facts to naturally reveal the theory and bring forth the truth." In words more consistent with what Mr. Pryor was trying to convey to the jury, confirmation bias can lead medical examiners or investigators to focus on evidence that aligns with a preliminary hypothesis that they made, this preconceived notion. And it potentially would cause them to overlook contradictory evidence that might disprove this belief that they already have. But keep in mind, originally the investigators in this case and the coroner allowed this case to be filed as an unattended death. I think it took a lot of courage and, frankly, confidence to change the ruling from that to murder after additional information came out, because it meant that they had to admit they missed something in the initial stages. Again, think of that quote by Sherlock Holmes. The investigators, in my opinion, should be commended for uncovering additional kinds of facts before finalizing their theory, and that is what led to the murder charges against Chad Daybell. So let's pause just long enough to watch John Pryor pitch this idea of confirmation bias to the court, followed by the state, or Lindsay Blake in this particular case, coming back with her own response. Let's watch that.
I want to talk to you about a little bit of a term in terms of your profession. The term is called confirmatory bias. Are you familiar with that term?
Vaguely familiar. A confirmation bias is what I think I know it as.
Okay, and explain to me what that means.
It's kind of a term that's been introduced over the last couple of years. Actually, it's probably been around longer than that, but in forensic pathology, just the last few years. Anyways, it just talks about, if you have something in your mind, or you're told a scenario in a case, if you're not going to just see that and make and lean your diagnoses towards that. For example, if there was a baby and somebody told you, someone saw the parent squeezing the baby, you might lean towards asphyxia because you're being biased by that history. So it's kind of a bias. It's not just looking at the scientific evidence in front of you, but you're being biased by other things.
So if someone were to say that they put the procedural history and some of the events that occurred around the time of Tammy Daybell's death, that would be an example of confirmatory bias. Would that be fair?
Possibly. Depends what was told them. Possibly,
Okay.
yes.
Well, you talked about the fact that someone saw the baby squeezed or shaken, and then the investigation is turned that way and leaned that way, correct?
Yes, that's what it's most commonly seen in, is like a shaken baby case.
So if someone has provided some information, regardless of whether it's relevant to the case, we should still be going back to the scientific evidence and base it on science and facts. Would that be fair?
Yes, as a physician, pathologist, our diagnosis should be based off science and what we can actually see, rather than speculating. Again, that's how I've always practiced, and that's how I teach.
And would it be fair to say that most of you folks in the field of forensic pathology would approach it the way you're approaching it?
Objection, Your Honor, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
I have nothing else, Judge. Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Raven.
Good morning.
You indicated that you are a forensic pathologist. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you work as a medical examiner?
I do not now.
In your current capacity, you're not working at a medical examiner's office?
No, I'm a forensic pathologist, an independent contractor at this point in my career.
Do you have investigators that work with you?
Yes, in the coroner's office, we'll still have investigators.
So you are in a coroner office system right now?
Yes.
In the current system you're in, who determines whether or not an autopsy should be conducted?
It really varies. Most of the time, it's the pathologist who determines that. It really depends. And a medical examiner, it's different because the pathologist is the medical examiner. The coroner system, it's a little different. It's the coroner who will bring the case in. Usually it's left up to the pathologist in my jurisdictions to determine the level of the examination.
And we've talked a little bit about your report. And do you still have that with you?
I do not.
May the witness be handed that last exhibit? And I believe you indicated that you reviewed the autopsy report and documents that were specific. See if I can find the phrasing here. That you reviewed the autopsy report and other pertinent information. Do you recall that?
Yes, I listed a few things, yes.
And in your report, there's a section, materials reviewed. Do you see that section?
Yes.
Is that an exhaustive list of the documents you reviewed in this case?
The initial, I believe I've had a few documents sent to me since this report. But I believe that would have been it, yes.
And do you mind reading those off for the record, what you reviewed?
Absolutely. I thought I wasn't supposed to, but I can.
Yes, it's an exhibit that's been admitted, so I think that's appropriate.
So I could just verbatim.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind doing that.
You have to excuse my voice, I'm sorry. The following materials were reviewed regarding the death of T. Daybell. Autopsy report authored by Dr. Lily Marston, co-signed by Dr. Eric Christensen. Autopsy photographs, toxicology reports from NMS and the Utah Department of Health. A brief investigative report from the Office of the Medical Examiner, State of Utah. A typed coroner report, not signed, dated, or on letterhead, unknown time, authored, or source. The Fremont County Coroner informal record of death report, a report by Deputy Greenhall, excuse the name, Detective Fabinich and Lieutenant Powell. Scene photographs, unknown source. Report by B. Mattingly. Fremont County incident report from incident from 10/09/2019. Copy of the death certificate for T. Daybell, signed 10/19/2019 by Brenda Dye, and the transcript of Dr. Christensen's testimony, Brenda Dye interview, and Deputy Coroner M. Wilmore's interview.
And you said maybe since then you've reviewed a few more documents?
Yes, I believe so, but that was 3 years ago, so I believe a few things have come through. When I started first reviewing them, a few things have come through since.
And do you recall what those things are that have come through?
I believe it was just, I believe it was different reports of what the coroner reported on. I don't recall specifically, I'm sorry.
As part of your, and let me back up, and these were documents that were provided to you by defense counsel?
That's correct.
So when you say you reviewed the autopsy report and other pertinent information, it was the defense that provided you that other pertinent information, is that correct?
The defense provided me everything, yes.
Did you review a report from Lieutenant Powell regarding requesting Walmart records?
That does not sound familiar, but I don't remember.
Did you review a report of an interview with Emily Daybell?
I don't recall.
Did you review a report of an interview with Paul Daybell?
I don't recall.
Did you review a report of an interview with Jana Penrose, a relative of Tammy Daybell?
I don't believe so.
Did you review a report of an interview with David Warwick?
I don't believe so. The name's not familiar.
And you said you reviewed some of the coroner reports. Would that be Brenda Dye? Does that name sound familiar?
It does sound familiar. Like I said, one was not signed. I didn't know who wrote it, but that name does sound familiar.
Did you review an interview that was conducted with Brenda Dye, a report of that?
I believe so, yes.
Did you review a report of an interview conducted with the Deputy Coroner, Cammie Wilmore?
Yes, I believe so.
Did you review a report that contained some records from a Lolly Time iCloud account?
No.
Did you review a report from Benjamin Dean, an analyst with the FBI?
No.
Did you review the Seasons medical records?
No.
Did you review the Teton medical records?
No.
And I think you indicated you did review some reports of the October 9th incident,
Yes.
and that would have been regarding an attempted shooting of Tammy Daybell. Does that sound familiar?
Yes.
Did you review a report of an interview with Matthew and Regan Price?
I don't believe so.
Did you review a report of an interview with Haley Palmer?
No.
Did you review any reports of interviews with Angela Yancey?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Ronald and Phyllis Douglas?
Judge, I'm going to object at this point to the relevance of how that would have an impact on the autopsy. She's going to go down a list of every report that any witness in this case
Mr. Pryor,
discussed.
no speaking objections, please, but I'll sustain the objection at this point unless there's some specific relevance to the autopsy.
And if I may respond?
Go ahead.
I'm reading off a list that was reviewed by the Utah medical examiners in making their findings. I
Okay,
think it is relevant.
all right. If that's the foundation for that, I'll allow that to continue. Thank you, Ms. Blake.
Did you review a report of an interview with Ronald and Phyllis Douglas?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Lisa Jensen?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Janet Davis?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Melissa Coles?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Mary Fran Jepson?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Faye Harris?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with John Ox?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Margaret Brown?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Stephanie Peralta?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Angela Johansson?
No,
Did you review a report of an interview with Shanna Miller?
I don't recall.
Did you review a report of an interview with Barbara Blair?
I don't believe so.
Did you review a report of an interview with Hannah Munoz?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Britt and Crystal Briggs?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Micaiah Baglin?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Cara and Sandra Briggs?
No.
Did you review a report of an interview with Emma Moss?
No.
Did you review a statement given by Greg Stoddard?
I don't recall.
Did you review 4 to 5 reports regarding insurance surrounding Tammy Daybell life insurance?
No.
Did you review a report indicating Tammy never used any sick days?
No.
Did you review her Walmart prescription records?
No.
Did you review a report regarding Tammy's cell phone?
No.
So as part of your review of the findings in the autopsy, you did not review the list that was just read off.
No.
Were those documents provided to you?
No.
Some of those that were indicated was the medical records. Did you specifically review the season's medical records associated with Tammy Daybell
As answered before, I did not.
and the Teton medical records?
Judge Aston answered.
Abstain.
Counsel asked you about reviewing or looking at medical records referencing shaking fits and seizure activity. Did you ever look at any medical records referencing shaking fits?
I don't recall the first question, and I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. I'm sorry. Can you rephrase that?
Did you ever review any medical records associated with Tammy Daybell that referenced shaking fits?
No, I did not.
Did you ever review any medical records associated with Tammy Daybell that referenced seizure activity?
I did not.
Where did that information come from?
That information came from the coroner's report.
And the coroner's report was information obtained from Chad Daybell?
I believe that's where she got it from, but you'd have to ask her. I'm not sure where they got their medical information from.
And you talked about a possible cause of death being cardiac arrhythmia.
It's one possible cause when there's no anatomical findings, yes.
And you said generally with that, you would find a structural defect.
And commonly we do, yes.
In the review of the autopsy report, was there any structural defect with Tammy Daybell's heart?
Not that they found, no.
You were also asked about the bruising on Tammy Daybell, and I think you said you defined it as unspecified or unspecific bruising?
Non-specific. Dr. Christensen testified to that too. They're non-specific bruises.
And counsel proceeded to ask you about putting pressure on someone's chest. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And you indicated you would expect it to be 2 people, at least if that was done?
No, it just takes significant weight to do that. I mean, it's hard to sit on somebody to cause death. And the scientific literature that's out there says probably 450 pounds or more. Actually, it was closer to 600, but they went down to 450.
But you would agree that it could be more than one person involved
Possibly.
if that were to happen?
If you have more than one person on you, yes.
And what are the other ways that asphyxiation can be caused or occur?
Well, again, asphyxia is just the process of the body not getting oxygen. So many things. We said drowning already. You're underwater, you're not getting oxygen, choking, you have airway obstruction, suffocation. You can be in a position like a car. People have asphyxia where they're underneath a car and the car collapses on them. Where the pressure on the chest. Asphyxia could be from chemical asphyxia, such things like cyanide can cause an asphyxial death because it blocks the oxygen getting to the tissues. So the list can go on and on.
And one way to cause asphyxiation could be to place a pillow over someone's head?
You could suffocate them by putting an object or something in front of their face, if that's what you mean.
Yes.
Yes.
One way to suffocate someone could be to put a plastic bag over their head, would that cause asphyxiation?
Yes.
And as a forensic pathologist, would you agree that you approach an autopsy more like a doctor as you're looking for symptoms, causes?
Well, we are a doctor, so we do look for scientific evidence of a diagnosis. Again, we don't speculate on diagnoses. We say this is a gunshot wound because we have evidence of the gunshot wound. We have hemorrhage, we have a knife wound. So again, yes, we use scientific evidence to base our diagnoses off of, like any doctor does.
And the difference being in an autopsy, your patient can't provide that information, correct?
That's correct.
So you would have to get it from collateral sources?
Pertinent to the cause of death, yes.
I have no further questions.
All right.
Well, during the autopsy, confirmation bias might influence how examiners interpret anatomical findings. If an examiner expects to find evidence of a particular cause of death, such as a drug overdose, they might give more weight to things like toxicology reports, the things that indicate drug presence, while dismissing other potential causes, like the underlying medical condition someone might be facing. So this is really a big deal, and this confirmation bias has to be resolved. The question we need to ask ourselves is whether the findings that support asphyxiation are compelling to you or not. And whether they're compelling to us doesn't really matter. Do you believe that they're compelling to the jury that's deciding the fate of Chad Daybell? In many cases, there are multiple potential causes of death in these kinds of cases. So confirmation bias in these situations needs to be examined, because it could lead the medical examiner to favor evidence that supports their initial hypothesis rather than following the evidence. Really important. And we really have to trust that this medical examiner is ethical and scientific in their approach. Now, once a hypothesis is formed, it can become an anchor that skews the interpretation of any new evidence that comes along. So examiners have to be cognizant of the fact that they might unconsciously downplay information that contradicts their already anchored belief system. Again, think of Sherlock Holmes and his comment on facts preceding theories. Bias can influence the final determination of the cause and manner of death, leading to biased reporting in the official autopsy report. And this again is what the Pryor is bringing up and making a big deal out of. And it is crucial that the state get the jury comfortable with the fact that these professionals, the medical examiner, didn't do this. Because it could that bias could extend to the autopsy report and to courtroom testimony that comes out. So it's really important that these cases are independently reviewed. You see, to ensure accuracy and objectivity in investigations, as well as these medical examinations, it is crucial to implement strategies that mitigate confirmation bias. Whenever possible, these examinations and examiners should conduct the analysis without prior exposure to potentially biasing information. Now, that's pretty hard to do in some of these cases, but that's why you'll see a profiler often say they want to just go into the crime scene and sit in a corner and start to theorize based on what they're viewing, rather than having the responding officer tell them what they were told. Now, this could include blinding the investigator to law enforcement's theories, or blinding them to specific details of the case until they've made their initial examination. So that's really important. Number two, they need to get a second opinion whenever they can. There is strength in numbers when it comes to an investigation like this. So encouraging independent reviews by colleagues can help identify and counteract confirmation bias. Second opinions can provide a fresh perspective and challenge initial conclusions. I mean, think back to your college days when you worked really hard on a paper and you submitted it only to have it come back covered with red lines and corrections. You were so focused you missed important things. It isn't a negative that it took the medical examiners 2 years to sign the autopsy report like Pryor was trying to make a big deal out of. And I think the prosecution could have been a little more aggressive in responding and saying, this is a positive. This proves that they really thought through this thing before signing off on that. Number 3, standardized protocols. When you establish and strictly adhere to standardized protocols for evidence collection and analysis, you can reduce the influence of individual biases and, frankly, evidence collection mistakes. So by having consistent procedures in place, all of the relevant evidence could be equally considered in this kind of a case. Number 4, I think we're on number 4, conduct regular training. It is imperative that regular training programs focus on this cognitive bias that can help these medical examiners and, frankly, investigators become aware of their own susceptibility to bias. It's a way in which they can learn strategies to counteract it and make sure that it doesn't happen in the investigation. As we raise awareness about confirmation bias, it becomes a crucial step in mitigating the impact that this bias can have on our investigations. Personally, I don't feel like there was confirmation bias in this case, although Mr. Pryor did exactly what a defense attorney should do: create question in the mind of the jury. So with that, I want to remind you of a couple of things in this case that I think are really important and that I hope the prosecution makes a big point of when they talk through this case, especially in their closing arguments. First and foremost, suffocation is a form of asphyxia, a thing where oxygen is prevented from reaching the lungs. And it can result from a number of different scenarios, including purposeful homicide. It can also happen in an accident or natural causes, but it has to be determined in a way that it can be corroborated against other pieces of evidence. Now, accurately identifying suffocation is crucial in criminal investigations, and I don't believe any experienced medical examiner would treat this responsibility lightly. Medical examiners meticulously gather and analyze evidence in order to establish suffocation as the cause of death. They didn't just reach out and grab something in the air or take a stab in the dark. They looked at the evidence and came up with a finding. Medical examiners conduct external body examinations where they look for other kinds of evidence that either suggests suffocation, supports it, or excludes it. Now, in the case of suffocation, they might look for things like petechial hemorrhages, these little small red or purple spots that are often found in the eyes, the face, the mucous membranes. These hemorrhages are significant indicators of asphyxia, including suffocation. And I can't remember in this particular case if after the fact at the autopsy they were able to determine things like petechiae. But again, it's really important, and that subsequent and kind of parallel investigation externally and internally of the body is so important in these criminal cases. The medical examiner might find signs of cyanosis or this bluish discoloration of the skin and the mucous membranes. It's due to this lack of oxygen. I mean, think about somebody who drowns and they oftentimes are blue. It's often seen in the lips or the fingertips, in the earlobes. These are indicators of this lack of oxygen that happened. Now, in Tammy Daybell's case, they found what they determined to be signs of struggle, including these bruises on Tammy's body. Now, the defense has tried to explain that away as the fact that she was anemic and she bruised easily. Well, these are specific and really weighty when you start thinking about other things like suffocation. Now, I don't think they discovered any kind of neck bruising or any kind of ligature marks. There's no broken hyoid bone. There's no thyroid cartilage damage. But they clearly have noted, even after exhumation, that there was fluid accumulation in her lungs, a sign of various types of asphyxiation, including suffocation. This really is tilting the needle, in my opinion, because all of these things in totality are starting to really point that suffocation is the reason. Of course, that's what the experts say, and I'm no expert, so I'm going to yield to their expertise. But in all, medical examiners look for things like swollen or congested organs. This is another sign of lack of oxygen. In the organs, they might find larger petechiae evidence in the lungs and the heart. Again, these blotching that occurs from the blood. As the medical examiner excludes other causes such as toxicology or carbon monoxide levels, they can more accurately determine suffocation as a cause of death, something that appears to me to be the case, again, in Tammy Daybell's death. Determining suffocation as the cause of death requires a comprehensive approach, something that involves a meticulous examination of external and internal signs. It requires histological analysis and toxicology testing. These screenings have to be brought together for a final diagnosis. It also requires a thorough crime scene investigation. So as medical examiners and law enforcement investigative experts adhere to these standardized protocols while remaining vigilant against confirmation bias, I believe the court can feel confident in the findings that, in this case, there was suffocation. And I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that, and I hope you're going to put them down below. I think it's evidence that is objective and it's reliable. In other words, it doesn't appear to me that there was any confirmation bias. But I'd be really interested in what your opinion is on this case, and I hope that you'll enter your comments in the chat box down below. Make sure you're responding to each other and be appropriate in your responses. Let's learn together and not be critical of each other. I hope that you'll consider sharing Profiling Evil with your contacts, and I hope you're watching for us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And don't forget about our audio podcasts, folks. You can subscribe to those on your favorite podcast platform. So from all of us at Profiling Evil, coming to you from Dallas, Texas, thanks again for your support. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.